He said no to New York. Let that sink in for a moment. The Yankees came calling. The Pinstripes. The most storied franchise in the history of American sports. The team that has signed legends, built dynasties, and paid whatever price it took to get the men it wanted. They came calling, and Scoville said no. Not maybe. Not let me think about it. No. And then, within 48 hours, the Los Angeles Dodgers announced the trade that nobody had predicted, nobody had fully believed was possible, and nobody in baseball will be able to ignore for the next 6 years. A 5-for-1 trade. A 6-year contract. And a seismic shift in the balance of power in Major League Baseball that will echo through every front office, every dugout, every press conference from now until October. This wasn't just a transaction. This was a statement. When the news first broke, the baseball world went quiet for exactly the kind of moment that only the biggest stories produce. Not loud. Not immediately chaotic. Just quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when something lands that is too large to process all at once. The Dodgers had completed a 5-for-1 trade to acquire Scoville. 5 players. 1 direction. 1 destination. Los Angeles. The details of the trade package were staggering on their own. 5 roster pieces, each one carrying value, each one representing months of scouting, years of development, and the kind of calculated sacrifice that only a franchise operating at the absolute highest level can afford to make. Dave Roberts didn't blink. Andrew Friedman didn't hesitate. They looked at what they wanted, they looked at what it would cost, and they paid it. That alone would have been enough to dominate the sports headlines for a week. But then came the contract. 6 years. 6 years of Scoville in Dodger blue. 6 years of what he brings to a lineup, to a rotation, to a clubhouse. 6 years of what it means to pair that kind of talent with the organization that has, year after year, proven that it knows how to build, how to sustain, and how to win. The Yankees were in the room. They made their case. They offered everything New York can offer, the market, the history, the money, the spotlight. And Scoville listened. He considered. And then he chose Los Angeles. There is a version of this story where that choice feels simple. It is not simple. Saying no to the Yankees never is. But Scoville said it anyway. And the reason why matters more than people are currently giving it credit for. You do not turn down the New York Yankees without a reason. And that reason, when you examine it carefully, tells you everything you need to know about where baseball is headed. Scoville didn't choose the Dodgers because of the weather. He didn't choose them because of the stadium, or the city, or the fanbase, as important as all of those things are. He chose the Dodgers because of what the Dodgers represent right now in the sport of baseball. A system. A culture. A way of doing things that has quietly become the most envied blueprint in the game. When a player of Scoville's caliber looks at his options, he is not just thinking about the contract years. He is thinking about winning. He is thinking about October. He is thinking about what his career looks like on the other side of 6 years, and what kind of legacy he wants to build during that time. And the answer, when you look at it through that lens, is not complicated. The Dodgers win. They have figured out how to build a team that doesn't just compete in 1 or 2 exceptional years, but sustains itself. They reload. They adapt. They find the players that other teams don't fully understand yet, and they put them in positions to succeed in ways that make the rest of baseball look on in something between admiration and frustration. Scoville saw that. He chose it with both eyes open. But here is where the story takes a turn that nobody in baseball had scripted. Because while the Dodgers were completing one of the most significant acquisitions of the decade, a different name was suddenly at the center of a storm that had nothing to do with what happened on the field. Kim Haung. The remarks came without warning, without context that could soften them, and without any apparent awareness of the wave they would set in motion. The comments made about Shohei Ohtani were not misread. They were not taken out of context. They were what they were. And in the hours that followed, the reaction was swift, unified, and without ambiguity. There are lines in professional sports that most players understand instinctively. Lines that exist not because of a rule written somewhere, not because of a memo distributed in a locker room, but because of a shared understanding that the game is bigger than any one opinion, any one moment, any one poor decision made in front of a microphone. Kim Haung crossed one of those lines. The trade came quickly. Emergency was not too strong a word for the speed at which it happened. The front office moved. The decision was made. And by the time the baseball world had fully absorbed what had been said, the transaction had already been completed. He was gone. An emergency trade in professional sports is never just about one comment. It never is. There is always a deeper calculation, a longer read on a situation that the front office has been quietly watching, weighing, filing away. The comment becomes the moment when the scale tips. It becomes the event that transforms a private concern into a public action. But what made this particular moment so significant was not just the speed of the response. It was what the response communicated about the culture that the organization had decided it was going to protect. There are franchises that would have managed the situation differently. There are front offices that would have issued a statement, held a meeting, accepted an apology, moved on. The calculus would have been different. The arithmetic of what it costs to make a trade versus what it costs to absorb the controversy would have come out on the other side. This front office did the math differently. And the result said something. It said something about what is tolerated and what is not. It said something about the kind of environment the organization is building. It said something about the standard, not the standard that gets spoken about in press conferences, but the standard that gets acted on when it matters. That is a different kind of message entirely. And so Scoville arrives in Los Angeles not into a quiet off-season acquisition. He arrives into a story that is already moving, already complex, already carrying more weight than a typical mid-season trade. He arrives into an organization that just moved quickly and decisively to protect something it values. He arrives into a roster that has been reshaped by sacrifice, 5 pieces, traded, to make room for him. He arrives with 6 years ahead of him and the full weight of that choice, that rejection of New York, already written into the narrative of his career. That is not a small thing to walk into. But there are players who shrink from that kind of entrance. And there are players who were built for exactly this kind of moment. The Dodgers spent 5 players and 6 years of contract space betting that Scoville is the second kind. The scouts made their case. The front office made their decision. The contract was signed. Now the field will speak. Step back for a moment and look at what Los Angeles has assembled. Not just this week. Not just this trade. Look at the arc of it. They have built a roster with depth at every level. They have a bullpen that functions as a system rather than a collection of individuals. They have a development infrastructure that turns raw talent into polished production with a consistency that other organizations genuinely cannot replicate. And they have a front office that makes decisions, big, expensive, complicated, sometimes controversial decisions, with a clarity of purpose that rarely wavers. The 5-4-1 trade for Scoville fits that pattern perfectly. It is not reckless. It is not impulsive. It is the kind of move that looks bold from the outside and, from the inside, looks like exactly the next step in a plan that was already in motion. They saw something in Scoville. They decided what it was worth. They paid it. Now he is theirs. There is a conversation happening right now in front offices across Major League Baseball. It is happening quietly, in the rooms where decisions get made and strategies get built and the future gets planned. And the subject of that conversation is the same in all of them. The Dodgers just got better. That is the simple version of what happened this week. Underneath the simplicity is a set of much more complicated questions. How do you compete with an organization that moves this fast? How do you build a roster that can withstand what Los Angeles is putting together? How do you attract the players who have seen what the Dodgers offer and made their choice accordingly? The Yankees tried. They offered New York. They offered the history and the money and the weight of that franchise. Scoville still said no. That is not just a story about one player's decision. That is a signal. And the rest of baseball heard it. When the dust settled on this week, the trade announcement, the contract news, the Kim Haung situation and its swift resolution, what remained was a picture of a franchise operating at full capacity. Not coasting. Not managing. Operating. Scoville chose Los Angeles because he saw what it means to be part of something like this. The organization moved on Kim Haung because it understood what it means to protect something like this. The 5-for-1 price was paid because the front office knew what it takes to sustain something like this. 6 years is a long time in baseball. Teams change. Players age. Rosters turn over. The game itself evolves in ways that make last year's blueprint obsolete by the time October arrives. But right now, in this moment, the Los Angeles Dodgers have done something that the rest of baseball cannot dismiss and cannot ignore. They got Scoville. He said no to New York to get here. And somewhere in the Dodgers front office, in the quiet way that decisions like this tend to be absorbed by the people who made them, Andrew Friedman nodded slightly, and started looking at the next move. Because with the Dodgers, there is always a next move. And right now, nobody in baseball is better positioned to make it.